radio up and listen. It's time for City Life. Here's Rob McGowan.
There we go. Run around like a chicken with my head cut off today.
Are you? Yeah.
Oh, so how are you anyway?
Good, man. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. Right on. You enjoying the city council work? Going good?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's been busy. A little bit of a break this week, just one meeting. So yeah, it's going good.
One meeting, yeah. Well, with hopefully you had a good New Brunswick day. Got to celebrate some time off. Were you up at any of the sunrise ceremonies or powwows or anything?
Yeah, I was up to the fisherman's powwow. We were away for the previous day, but yeah, we were up to the fisherman's powwow there with the kids. My son, I worked up in Yale Ground for 7 years, and then my son went to school up there for a couple of years. Okay. So he got a bunch of friends up there and stuff. So yeah, it was good for him to get up and see some people.
Oh yeah, it was awesome actually. First time seeing people together again in a while since the COVID, so It was nice to see that. And I actually was at the sunrise ceremony with there was a bunch of counselors there and people that were MLAs and stuff and MPs. Cool. So it was quite an event, and we had a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, is that your first time going to that?
No, I've been to. I've probably been 4 or 5 times to the fisherman's powwow, to the sunrise ceremonies and stuff for different reasons. But no, I always enjoy going to powwows. It's a good time to get out and meet people and experience culture that you don't get to engulf every day of your life. So I like it.
Yeah, it's good energy for sure.
Yeah. Actually, the very first time I went there many years ago, my brother's in the RCMP, but and what attracted me to it was they had actually had the RCMP horseback riders there, which was really interesting. This was a long time ago. I can't remember even what year it was, but and I went up and sort of discovered some of the whole ceremony behind everything, and it was quite. Met a few people and I've had friends over the years from it. I don't know if you know Catfish Lloyd, but
oh yes,
a lot of guys. Yeah, he's quite the historian. So we're always every time I get a chance to chat with him, it's awesome. And
yeah, same as me. I see him around town. I'll always sit down with Lloyd and have a say with him. He's always got something. And then when I worked up in Yale Ground too, he'd always be popping in with a book he found or a picture he found, and he kind of used the like mule. He'd be like, "Now get this to this person, right?" Because like we were at the food center, so people were coming in all the time. So we were kind of Lloyd's trading post for a few times. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I might as well get into it, I guess. So every Saturday now we have a show. Basically, it's on from 9 to 10 Saturday mornings. And it's what it is I try to have a different counselor on every week and just talk about what's going on in council and what we're working on, and just so people can start to get involved and see what council actually does. You know, I really disappointed me that so many people don't even know who the counselors are and what they do and the work that goes into all keeping our city up and getting things done. So I thought this is a way to kind of make it easy. You know, you're driving along, you just click it on, you can hear what's going on. So what's on the agenda in the last week that you've been working on that's important to you?
The last week. I mean, that's
or a couple of weeks, month, whatever. But and since you started in back to counseling here.
Yeah, the process has been kind of overhauled, right? So all of our meetings are public meetings now. There's no more kind of closed door meetings. The press has a lot more access to the meetings. And that's ultimately an exceptional transition. It's a lot of kind of learning and a lot of trust in kind of the fellow councillors that people are going to kind of do their back end work and come prepared and that sort of thing, right? Because I guess previously we had relied on kind of a lot of city staff to kind of educate council and bring them up to speed on things. And this time, the lights are on when you show up, so you have to
That's a good thing. That's a good thing.
It's a huge thing, and kind of to the point you made before we started here of getting people engaged and bringing people up to speed. That's where it starts, right? Is that transparency.
So are people allowed to go to the meetings, or they just can watch them, or how does that work exactly?
Yeah, so we have a limited space, like in council chambers. There's only like room for like 5 or 6 people.
Okay.
But all the meetings are public. I think Councillor Arsenault had shared the schedule. And And then obviously any public hearings or zoning meetings and all that are always public. But
so for feedback, how does the feedback loop work for you guys? Like, so if you have a meeting, is there a place where people can go comment on the meeting and talk about, what they thought of what you guys talked about or your decisions and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, like correspondence to council, the best way to correspond with City Hall is through, I would say, email, right? It's a standing record or a written letter, right? We have a lot of people that write letters, but that gets it onto the record. And now if every correspondence that comes into City Hall is read in a public meeting,
Oh, really? Okay.
that's how that response. And so, the response is not always kind of what the person wants to hear, or often the timelines aren't what people kind of want to hear. Government's a slow moving process. You move slow to get it right. And we're always kind of conscious too of establishing precedents, right? So when you do one thing for one case, then you're going to have to do the same thing for the next case, right? So,
yeah.
That due diligence of taking your time and having those discussions and having staff weigh in is always important. But to your question, the best way to correspond is through written correspondence, through emails addressed to mayor and council, to the clerk's office. And even I've noticed since this council started, there's just been ultimately more engagement from general public. Like I was always kind of surprised, until as of late, that just the few emails that we do get, right? We hear lots of opinions, we hear lots of people's concerns, but not a whole lot of people kind of put their pen to paper and write their name on the kind of the email or the letter, right? So that triggers it, that kind of gets the ball rolling, and everything will be discussed and given its due kind of process. But yeah, we've seen an uptick in that for sure. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that's what we're working on. We want everybody to make sure they're contacting their counselors and letting them know what it is we want in the city. And there's a lot of groups to get together and they're always working hard. Like, what about the trail system? How is that in your idea of bringing the trails, and how is that going forward? And are we still way back in the process? Are we moving it along pretty good? Or
yeah, so the update there. So the previous council, so if you go way back to like I think it was 2011, there was an active transportation plan that was kind of done by the city, ultimately shelved. Didn't really get a whole lot of attention, didn't get adopted by the city. So the city adopting it says, we're going to do this, right? Not just, we're going to look at this, we're going to do it. So that's a motion of council to adopt the plan. And that didn't happen. So then we get ahead to 2016. There's a lot of people mobilizing the community. And then we get to head to 2021 and people are really active, and we see the need for it with the pandemic, right? Like get outside, get active, be healthy. And that infrastructure is just super important, and we're lacking. So we commissioned I think it was $60,000 or $70,000 to do a kind of full study, a costed study. So when I say costed, I mean like, here's an opportunity to do new trails. This is what's going to cost. Sidewalks should be done here. This is what it'll cost. So that has been kind of first draft. So we've seen the kind of draft of that. And now we're kind of going through, staff are laying in comments, and then council will have an opportunity to kind of get a good first peek at it. And then we'll go forward. But I've been really encouraged. And one of the cool things that I saw coming out of it was the idea of a water trail system. So when we think of trails, we're thinking of land. But ultimately we know that, a lot of people get their recreation and leisure on the water, and being able to identify and map and celebrate an active water trail system, which I thought, that speaks to Miramichiers and speaks to kind of advertising and marketing and tourism and leisure and recreation as well. But then on the other side, what people were asking for was paved trails. They were asking for sidewalks. I know they've identified a loop like the King George Highway and Water Street, that loop around the river. Some portions have sidewalks, some portions don't have sidewalks. So that was identified both by the public. And then what I saw come out in the draft report was that, that was prioritized and identified as the kind of the most obvious place to start is just get good sidewalks so people can kind of do that loop around the river and just kind of get, to work and use
So
the bicycle.
with these sidewalks, would you be able to ride bikes on them and stuff, or is it just for walking, or how would that work?
Yeah, I think, I don't think we're at the place now, like you see some other municipalities that are doing like double wide sidewalks, right? Where, bike lanes built into the sidewalks and stuff. I don't know if we're there, kind of to do it full blown in that manner. It's expensive, right? You got to buy up land. But I think what we'd be looking at, and again, this is super preliminary, but what's been identified as traditional kind of sidewalks as a baseline around that loop. Again, that Water Street, King George Highway around the river. But again, hasn't been adopted. We've just seen a draft, but it's quite thorough. And then there's some more kind of just strictly recreation-based kind of trail systems, right?
Okay. So what about things like the Chatham Head Bridge and stuff? I've seen people talk about maybe adding that into a trail system stuff. Is there talk about that or ideas about that, or the cost? I imagine the cost would be substantial for something like that, just for insurance wise alone and making sure it was safe. But so is that at all in the talks, anything like that, or is that just rumors? Or
I would love to see it happen. I know we've talked about it previously with the last council, kind of semi-seriously when Minister Fraser was, or when Bill Fraser was the minister at the time, Department of Infrastructure. We had numbers at that point. I think they were anywhere like $6-7 million kind of thing, right? The province owns that infrastructure, so the city doesn't own it. Okay. But the city certainly sees the value in having it. You think of Fredericton and their walking bridge and how much it gets used and how much it gets celebrated, and people take photos of it and people have events on it. I think there's a huge potential there, especially to connect the kind of the residential area of Chatham Head to the downtown core of Newcastle.
Yeah, that would be something if you could just walk right from one side over and go along the river for a walk and end up in the business districts. Like there's a lot of potential there, I think, for all that stuff.
But there's a lot of kind of risk and cost,
yes.
And ultimately we don't own it. So we'd have to have a dance partner with the province to do a project.
So are you in contact with the MLAs or the MPs for federal and provincial about the cost of these things, or is there studies in place to see what it would cost to do something like that, or still just in talks? Or
yeah, there's no active talks on that file, to be honest.
Okay.
We've not had a whole lot of active talks on any infrastructure from the province as of late. We put in for our highway, designated highway, we got $0. So there's just not a whole lot of funds coming from the province for any infrastructure. So
and are they saying anything? Well, I was listening to the minister the other day. She'd posted an email or a video about putting the sidewalks back on the bridge. I guess they weren't going to on the main bridge, but now that's going to happen. So that's a good thing. Yeah,
and I don't know, like that was kind of, I think I would classify that as rumor. The idea that there was never going to be sidewalks on it. Okay. Over the years, we've seen lots of different variations of plans or heard rumors of plans, but the latest was that the provincial government doesn't have solidified plans for what the bridge and the deck is going to look like on Centennial Bridge. Which I find a little bewildering, given how it's been an active file for 10, 12, 20 years.
Does seem a little odd.
Plan.
So how does the process work for communication between your council and the provincial counterpart or the federal counterpart? How do you guys communicate back and forth about getting funds? Do you send letters? Do you have somebody in your department sends a letter once you have an idea? How does that work?
Yeah, ultimately, we have a really good kind of relationship with our MLAs. So there's kind of like two avenues for communication. There's the bureaucratic avenue, right? So bureaucrats talk to bureaucrats and politicians talk to politicians, right? So probably, once or twice, maybe even 3 times a year, city council will have kind of family meetings with the MPs and the MLAs, and we'll get dinner and kind of discuss the priority areas and what we want to see kind of moving forward. And then the city staff, the city manager, the directors are, almost daily conversations on some file with the other governments, right, and the bureaucrats on that level. But
Okay.
it's constant dialogue. Absolutely. It just sometimes things move.
So
Sometimes
there's no actual formal process of that. You can say we've sent this letter 5 times. We've asked the province, they've said no, or we've asked the federal government, they said no, so that people can see what's
yeah.
going on with the communication when they make decisions on voting for a provincial or a federal counterpart. Say, well, wait a minute, they're not providing us money. Why are we voting for them? That's what I'm looking for. The structure of who
Yeah.
we
So
choose to help us out.
we send formal communication and requests kind of all the time, right? They're often
Okay.
done. Again, there's sometimes it's done at the kind of staff bureaucratic level of saying like, we want to see if this is available. We want to purchase land. It's back and forth on that kind of thing. And then there's the more political kind of flair of formal letters that say, we need you to move on this, and the people of Miramichi need this done, and that kind of
Yeah.
rhetoric.
Okay. So that does happen. That's good.
It does
And
happen all the time. Without provincial and federal partners, the city just doesn't have the financial ability to do the projects that need to be done. Yeah.
no, and I keep hearing all the time that lately, provincially, we're just not getting any help at all on anything. It seems like it's a real struggle to get any kind of funds from the provincial government to help in Miramichi.
Yeah, and I think I know when the Conservative government went in, they had talked about balancing budgets and this sort of thing, and so I think they take a relatively pragmatic approach to that. But Miramichi is not, when they have broken through and when they have awarded funding, Miramichi is not seeing it.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's interesting. So as far as council, it's a new council and you guys are working together. How is the dynamic? Do you find it's a council that seems to be able to work together and communicate together? I see you guys are out at events and I see everybody sort of buddying up. It looks pretty good so far. So how do you find that?
Yeah, I think it's been great. Like for me personally, I've had a friendly relationship with all of the new councillors kind of coming into this, right? As kind of just community organizers and friends. So that was easy for me personally. But I think as a group, we've certainly solidified as a group that wants to be connected to the community, that wants City Hall to move and to listen and to communicate. That communication word has come up a lot. And we also, I think we see that this is an opportunity and a time to invest, right? We just came out of a pandemic. The private sector, we see development happening. When I look back to 2016, like the idea of development happening in the city, there was none. There was very, very little. And not just housing, which was a huge issue and affected people's lives, but just general development. There was very little happening. And now we see apartment buildings going up. We see apartment buildings being proposed and rezoned for, and we see car dealerships being built and small stores being kind of, restaurants and cafes. And so there's that sense of vibrancy and kind of boom on the private side. And I think on the public side and city side, we need to be able to match that with our investments and keep that momentum going, especially coming out of the pandemic, right? Small businesses are, in a tough, and they made it through, and to be able to build something that they can kind of depend on in terms of infrastructure and economic development is incredibly important.
Okay, that sounds great. Now the one of the other questions I had was about so I've gotten two sort of different answers. I've talked to Sam Johnson, I've been talking to Veronique, and I've been talking to the MLA, Michelle Conroy, and I seem to get not conflicting, but different ideas about things like the Northern Bypass Highway. There's different ideas. Some have said there's reports saying that it's not really, it's great while the bridge is there and they're doing all the construction on the bridge, we really need it. But after the bridge is done, that the money that would be spent on it isn't necessarily a good investment for us. Where's your ideas on that, and what do you think about that?
I think there's opportunity there beyond. I know I've heard that argument. I've heard the argument that we have a bypass like between the former CFP or the retirement village and Chatham Head, right? Like there's a bypass there. Ultimately can be accessed just by crossing a couple bridges. And that'll, I've heard the argument that satisfies the same need. I don't think that's the case. We see the traffic on the King George Highway on a good day. It's a lot. One of the dynamics kind of being played out there is that so the King George Highway is a designated provincial highway. So the province owns and maintains that road. They're responsible for that. The city often contracts that work and depends on the funding for that. Again, we got $0 to do that work this year. So that road continues to deteriorate.
Okay.
But the province is responsible for that road. So the idea that like if a northern bypass is built, then the King George Highway would become the full sole property and responsibility of the city, right? There wouldn't be a need for it to be a designated highway. So that's a financial issue, right? Like the city has to be prepared to
maintain it and things.
Maintain and the cost of that whole stretch. That's not free. Ultimately, the taxpayers would, take on that burden. And so there's different elements kind of at play there. But I think, all of those things kind of put aside, and would the northern bypass satisfy a need, and I think a growing need as we develop, as we get more dense. We see a lot of development happening on the King George Highway, 80 unit buildings being proposed, 118 unit buildings being proposed, 45 unit buildings being proposed. That's all cars and traffic, right? And so we need to be aware of that. It's ultimately becoming a kind of a residential kind of pedestrian kind of connector road, not highway. So we need a highway there. Yeah. Okay. And I think there's an opportunity to connect back into the city from the northern bypass, right? Like being able to have some off ramps that connect into some residential areas off of that and stuff. The previous council had made a motion that we support it. I'd still support it 100%.
Okay. So now the last question I have about that kind of stuff, technical, is for building a new center. I've heard the argument that we could go ahead without funding from the provincial government to get started. And then I've heard the argument that we shouldn't even think about getting started without the funding to say the provincial government's in. Where do you stand on that issue as far as everybody seems to want to move forward on it? Some want to wait until we have the provincial promise in place and the money. And others have said, maybe we got to start moving ahead and can't wait for the province because we're not getting the money. So where do you stand on that issue?
Yeah, I think as we stand here today, politics is a funny thing. So, all we have now is a hope and a prayer that money would come from the province, right? So I'm not comfortable sitting and waiting another 10, 12, 20 years on a hope and a prayer that eventually money is going to kind of come, right? Maybe it never does. I think ultimately we have enough money to move forward. I would hope that, again, there's that hope word, that the province does pony up something, right? Maybe it's not 25%, maybe it's not 30%, maybe it's not to that level, but I would think that a good responsible provincial government would at least pony up something, right? We see a lot of stuff coming out of the province around wellness and well-being and built environment. A wellness center is what we need to kind of, provide a healthy kind of future for our community at large and our youth. And we are bleeding money out of buildings like the Golden Hawk, right? It's burning oil,
So your position is it's the bleeding that we're doing to stop that bleeding, go ahead with the money and start working on it on our own, trying to solve the problem and hope the province kicks in later?
Yeah, and hopefully they kick in a little bit, right? Like we had banked, the business case was built on them, like, I don't know what it was, like 25% or as a partner, right? And that initial, maybe they're not there, but, a couple million and, kind of gets us, to a better place, right? And now we're able to partner with the municipal or with the federal government and the municipality directly. Previously, we needed the province to be a funding partner on the project, but
and are all the MLAs that you're working with on board towards getting that funding? Are they working towards that? Do they believe in the project? Or?
Yeah, that's my understanding. I mean, they've always been committed to the project. Obviously we have a federal election coming up. It's the worst kept secret in the country.
So do you guys that's another thing I was thinking about, council. How do you put pressure on councillors that are going to be running to sort of get a little bit of that word in there now? Like, these are the things we need. Where do you stand on it before you run? Like, are we getting those issues out across to those councillors anyway, or should people be writing them letters to sort of get an idea of where they're going to go before we put that vote in?
Yeah, no, we've had, I think we have some scheduled sit downs with some of the candidates. We had made attempts to kind of to discuss the bridge project in particular from a provincial perspective, and obviously 2 of the candidates are active MLAs on that file. We've had some interest, right? So there's kind of I would think they're very well aware of the city's priorities, given their previous or their current role as MLA. Considering the conservative and liberal candidates, if they're not aware of the priorities of the city, then something got missed somewhere over the last 8 years.
Well, that's good. So yeah, and so does the council? Well, I guess no. I won't go there because I won't make you pick sides in the election. That might get a little tricky. Yeah, depending who's coming up. I'm just trying to figure out who's better for us and who will get us moving ahead the best. But that's hard to gauge. I guess they're all going to promise the moon, but
and ultimately, like we've seen what happens when we have representation that's in power, and when we have representation that's in a majority situation. It's different, right? So it's not always up to the representative that's going to Ottawa or Fredericton.
Well, when I was talking to last week on the show, we had the MLA, Michelle Conroy, and she was saying when she was in the first part of her seat, it was a minority government and they could actually push for stuff. And then when they got a majority government, it was like, nope, we don't have no power at all. It's kind of, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Strategic voting, people will start thinking what's better for our city. I don't know. So that makes it hard, I guess, but what can you do? So is there anything about council that you have seen accomplished or is going forward that you're thinking, wow, that was amazing. We got this done, or we're close to getting this done and it really got to you, touched you?
I think we were so early in our term, Rob, like that.
That's true.
To have those milestones that are kind of concrete is tough. I certainly, like, we went through a controversy there with the Forest Corner.
Up in Logieville,
up in Logieville, and I mean, there was balls were dropped on the city side of it, especially around kind of communication and kind of how we lay out projects for how we lay out the projects to be executed. But I think ultimately it gave me a huge sense of kind of confidence that, like, all of the councillors, the new councillors, had nothing to do with that, and the old councillors that were returning were able to kind of see we had each other's backs to some extent, right? And there was a sense of confidence that was, no one was taking opportunities to say I wasn't here or I wasn't involved in that. I had nothing to do. People were trying to see where mistakes were made ultimately, but we're trying to see how we get better, right? And we were all on the same page on that, and I think we do have a council that works hard together, and I think that'll continue for the next 4 years.
Well, that's awesome. Well, I want to thank you, Chad, for taking some time to come in, let us know what the city's doing, what you guys are working on, and I appreciate all the service you're doing and helping us out.
Thanks so much, Rob. Appreciate you doing this.
No trouble. Thanks again for coming on, Chad. You have a great day.
Okay.
Like a bird on a tree, I'm just sitting here. I got time.